In this episode, we're going to take a look at some basics like soldering and installing a new motherboard, as well as taking a look at a GN Caboose, where we do some hacking, as well as take a look at some of the prototypes here at Northtown Yard. And Colin Bohannon answers the viewer's question of the week. And we cover all this on this episode of the GN in 1970.
70s.
In a previous episode, we worked on this Athearn ready-to-run GP35. Well, I was asked the question, how do you remove the shell? Well, on a basic RTR, you just need to remove the couplers, and you're able to then lift the shell off the chassis. I'm also going to remove the original motherboard and replace it with a Nix Trains 21-pin decoder. And to be able to do that, it's a fairly simple, straightforward solution. You're going to want to look at where track power comes from. This is the right rail. That's where the power comes from on an Athearn ready to run. I'm going to use a red wire. And on the left rail is actually this little dot here. A screw would normally be applied, which is actually attached to this particular wire that has a little brass plate that you're going to be able to screw down to the chassis. That gives you the left rail power. So that takes care of your track power. And you move on to your motor power, the top copper bar. That's going to be your orange wire. I use this old harness from a Digitrax decoder, and I use the wire that is left here. That's going to be attached or soldered onto the top. The other one is actually attached here. You can see it on the bottom of the motor. That would normally be your gray lead. I would actually pull out a gray wire somewhere in here. All right, this gray wire would be replaced on the bottom, but I'm actually going to just leave the black wire as is. So those are the motor power leads. All right, we got a Q question for you. The CB&Q Class XML16s that consisted of 205 cars in their roster, built by the Berwick Foundry and Forge. They were equipped with National 3C cushion underframes, Evans DFB load dividers, and the interior length was 50 foot 6 inches. They also had 10-foot Youngston doors. That was all information that you may not have known, but I'd also question, what year did the Burlington receive these 50-foot boxes? Was it A, 1967? B, 1971, C, 1974, or D, 1969?
He said 69.
All right, here we have an Atlas Classic GN Caboose where I'm actually replacing the toolbox. I'm referencing Scott Thompson's Volume 3 of the Great Northern Equipment Guide. It is great. Along with the detailed parts provided by Moloko, the correct doors and toolboxes that go on Great Northern Cabooses. I end up taking my time to make sure I file off any of the loose pieces or sprues that are left over on the toolbox just to true it up the best I can. This is just a nicely detailed element to be able to add to these cabooses, and again, it's accurate to the Great Northern. What I use here is 10X7R. You can use just about any of these plastic welding glues, but this is what I use. Put a little bit inside. I usually try to use it sparingly so it's not oozing out the sides, but nonetheless, nice little toolbox we got going here. We'll get this thing test fit onto the caboose itself to see if it fits, and well, look at here. It doesn't. You can see there's a couple areas I'm going to have to trim off, and it's going to take a little bit more than just a little filing. All right, you can see that the toolbox doesn't quite fit. We're going to modify the bottom of the toolbox. We're going to cut off a portion of the original Atlas toolbox, as well as a little bit of the underframe there to be able to get this to fit a little bit better. We bring out the big guns. We're using the Dremel tool to be able to cut this off. All right, we've got that buzzed off. We're also going to modify the frame a little bit to ensure that we can get the toolbox to fit up under there nicely. And after a little bit of tweaking, you can see here, we end up with a fairly nice fit. It's not too bad. Now just to get it painted black. Like Johnny Cash, all black.
3, 2, 1. Would you look at the size of that boy's head? It's like an orange on a toothpick. It's a virtual planetoid. It's probably got its own weather system. He just ripped off Solar American Oximeter. And you nailed it. You're right. You got it. Oh, brilliant. Oh. Why is he wearing an organ cover? Well, he must be in charge, BMOC, baby. Big man on campus. And all the people that are working going, oh, here comes the white helmet. Look busy. Ooh, yeah, we're working. And then the white helmet is thinking, oh, I better look like I'm in charge. Oh, I tell you. Head, move.
We're going to look at the basics of soldering to be able to get this thing ready for its new motherboard. Note the spring in top of the motor. You don't want to lose that. It is there to hold the brush down in place, and if you don't have it, your motor's not going to run. Make sure you clean the copper tab. We're going to get this thing cleaned off nice because you want to make sure you get a good solder connection. That is what is key in soldering, is actually the prep work. Make sure that you don't have any gunk or dirt on there because you're going to have yourself some problems. Here's the orange wire we mentioned earlier. I use a wire stripper to clean off the insulation and be able to get this thing ready to be tinned. By tinned, I use soldering paste, and soldering paste just helps the solder flow a little bit better. I dip a little bit of the soldering paste onto the end of the wire. And I add a little bit of solder, just like this here, and that's going to leave a little solder on the actual wire. I'll put a little bit on the actual contact point, and then we're going to meld the two together. All right, so now that we've got this complete, we're able to put this back onto the locomotive. The motor leads are now taken care of, and they're going to be able to be hooked onto the motherboard. We're going to move on to the left rail track power. That is the black lead, and I'm adding a little extra wire here just in the event that I decide to hardwire this right to the actual truck frames themselves. But we're going to screw this on, and we'll be able to tether this then onto the motherboard when that time comes. And now we move on to the right rail leads, and those leads are actually attached by a couple of brass connectors that originally come on the ready-to-run locomotive. And this is just a nice way to be able to solder the wire to it, as you can see here. And then it just slides onto these posts. Sometimes I cut these posts down, so then that would slide down vertically. But in this case, I'm leaving it as original as possible. And I just slide these two leads on. Now the chassis itself is ready for the board. I've got my right rail power. I've got my left rail power. I've got my motor leads.
That's all I need too. I don't need one other thing. Not one. I need this. The bell game and the chair and the remote control and the matches for sure.
What else you need is to get the answer to the question of what year did the Burlington receive this 50-foot box? It was D 1969. The Burlington purchased 3 groups of these freight cars, and they received them then cascade green in anticipation of the BN merger. Ooh, tough crowd. They must love their queue. I had the opportunity to get out with my 3 little ones to do a little rail fanning, and here we are at Northtown Yard, just northeast of Minneapolis. We caught the CP. They're actually coming from Humboldt or the Camden area. They're heading eastbound. Nice paint scheme here. Let's see if we can get a better look at these guys. Here we are at the St. Anthony Bridge. I'm just going to let you kick back and take this in. To give you a little backstory on what's happening here, we are in Northtown Yard. This was a former Northern Pacific yard. In the background, you also will see some strings of locomotives. Those locomotives are at the ends of their leases, or they're just temporarily being stored down here. If you do have a keen eye, you can see in the very center of that string there are a pair of SW switchers. One of them happens to be a former Great Northern SW1500. So that's kind of cool from a history standpoint. The elevators that you see off in the distance, that is near Shoreham Yard. That is where the Sioux Line, now CP, comes in and out of. And then to the right is actually Minneapolis. If I swing on over to the right, we'll show you the Minneapolis skyline. All right, can we get back to the trains? You done shoot about as good as you model. Cullen's question of the week is, are you ever discouraged by other modelers? Yep. I scroll on the old interweb and I see other people's work and I think, nope, ain't gonna be able to do that. Well, you gotta realize they didn't start there. They started right where you're at, and their work at one point looked like it came fresh out of a donkey's. That's right. You can do it. You can figure it out, because if you don't try, you're never gonna get there. Cullen's out. Hopefully you enjoyed this most recent episode of the GN in 1970, and even if you didn't, you can pop over to the channel and take a look and see if there's a video there you might like. There's the GN in 1970, the virtual tour of the GN in 1970, as well as Sue the Milwaukee Road. I want to give a huge thanks to those that have hit the like button, hit subscribe, as well as commented on various videos. It means a lot to me because we've actually connected as modelers and be able to learn different tips from one another, as well as learn about other channels and guys that are sharing content. I don't make these videos for me, I make these videos for you, so hopefully you're enjoying them and you enjoy the future episodes of the GN in 1970.
70s.